Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel. Today is Wednesday, September 28th. Let's hop in. Which basically means that I have today and any time after tomorrow, any small amount of time after tomorrow to finish as far as I'm going to get with this Synchro XY Z festival. Let's see. Time limits. I've already died many times on the time limits. So I would like to see them kind of expand it and give you more time, but I imagine they're going the other direction. So these updates will be implemented in phases as soon as they're available. The time limit at the beginning of a duel will be changed to 300 seconds, which time will be added at the beginning of your turn by 90 seconds, which I believe you only get 30 seconds now. Now, the time limit at the beginning of a duel, 300 seconds, I believe, is actually shorter. Time limit will not exceed 300 seconds even if it's added. So there will be a max cap of 300 seconds. But you'll get more per turn, which that's probably a little bit better of a way to do it. At a certain level, then these numbers should just be kind of randomized within a range. That way you can't program against it. Just to say, oh, sometimes you'll have 30 seconds added, sometimes you'll have 35 seconds added. Although, 95 seconds. And then that's October 11th. And then sometime between November and December, the time added at the beginning of the turn will be reduced to 60 seconds. Time added at the beginning of an opponent's turn will be 30 seconds, and the time limit will not exceed 300 seconds even when if it's added, which that's kind of a repeat of this. And then the odd change, unless you get 90 seconds now, and they're just saying nothing has changed in that aspect. Also, there's a maintenance note, so they are going to go down for maintenance again. It's kind of pointless that they pop up a lot of these notifications. So yeah, I'm starting a little later today because I was, for the first time in probably a year or two, actually getting some decent value out of watching something from Giant Bomb, in that I was watching their quick look of that Disney dreamlike game, trying to figure out what it really is. And it looks like it's very much a Animal Crossing game. It has fishing and farming and cooking and nothing else. There's a stamina bar and there's a currency of at least one type. Actually, there's two currencies, but it's in this weird early access that feels fairly finished. So my worry certainly, as far as Dreamlight Valley, I think is the name of the game. My worry is that there's going to be microtransactions, and seems almost certainly that there's daily quests. So it definitely would take a lot of restraint on Disney's part to not try to fill the game with microtransactions and a premium currency of real world money equivalency. It is oddly also very much Disney adults. Like, seemingly, according to Giant Bomb, you can't even play as a child character. Although, I will have to also say, Giant Bomb's quick look is straight up not as informative as it could have been, because throughout the entire quick look, they're just commenting and alluding on the fact that the adult Disney character that you create looks like an adult. I mean, it's hardly a case that that the female character he was creating was extreme in that she had like giant buttocks or triple G size breasts or anything like that. It was just, okay, this is a shapely woman figure of an adult that is wearing different outfits. And at a certain level, it seems almost like, well, it's childish certainly to say like if like the first time a teenager or 10-year-old sees a boob or sees large breasts in a shirt, just obsessing about it and talking about it, it's hardly the level of maturity that adults really should be at, in my opinion. There definitely is nothing really adult in this Disney game. So yeah, right now we're starting with 300. You start with 300 seconds, and then there's no real telling what this yellow bar is without it starting to count down, but we possibly will get it to count down here. And I'm just playing this pre-built deck I have so I can hopefully XYZ summon a bunch of things, because that's one of the daily quests. But yeah, despite them being incredibly and stupidly distracted in the quick look, they actually did give me more of a general idea of what that game is, because the trailers have not really done a good job of explaining what Dreamlight Valley was supposed to be. Now that I know it is kind of a Stardew Valley slash what else was like Animal Crossing game, I kind of know. Like, your best hope is that it's a one-time purchase, and with free updates, it being Disney, I wouldn't be surprised if it's a one-time purchase with DLC that's reasonably priced. That still isn't terrible. Worst case scenario, though, and very high possibility, is that it is going to be a game with microtransactions and just free-to-play grind, and very quickly, much like Animal Crossing, you're going to be turned into a worker working for daily quests. Even Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters here is basically that. Like, you get turned very quickly into being a worker working for daily quests if you want to stay free to play. Let's see. But I kind of hope if they're a little bit conservative and don't have microtransactions in it, that the game would kind of work. It is kind of weird that there are no kid characters, kid models, but maybe that would come later. As far as I doubt you'll have children and marriages fairly quickly in the game, although you could see that happening eventually, and even having children to get to The Sims. Arguably, I guess there is a mix there between a game where it's like The Sims and you can decorate and design everything, but there are actual jobs you go and actually do, which I guess that is different than The Sims, where you just kind of drive away to your job and then come back a few hours later from your job. There very possibly is a Sims expansion I don't even know about that does have you actually do mini games at the jobs, but that's where your actual gameplay is, and inherently there's not a lot of gameplay around Animal Crossing or Stardew Valley unless you love decorating and designing an area and grinding on simplistic mini games. And that works for a lot of people that love Animal Crossing, and there should be an Animal Crossing competitor on non-Nintendo systems. But it really isn't the best experience that I could imagine as far as gameplay. And I don't know how you really fix that either, because there's just a lack of emphasis on having having a good gameplay mechanic and gameplay loop, instead focusing on just a kind of grindy gameplay loop. It's Starlight Valley is really not like a gacha game, and Animal Crossing's not a gacha game, even though it sort of is, in that there's a bunch of costumes and decorations you can buy. But it's just not really like that. It's like, because the items you're getting as far as clothing and furniture and stuff is just not anywhere as interesting as what most gacha games are going to give you, which are going to be either anime waifu characters or Pokemon-like characters or something like that. And there's no kind of random element in it that would make it a gacha game, because you're just buying things directly and you know what you're getting, so that it's not random loot box type things. So, for the most part, gacha games aren't any better. We have Andrew Murphy on the chat saying yo, so I'll say hello back. But yeah, it could be fairly interesting. There is perhaps, it's silly to say this, but at a certain level, there's perhaps going to be a drying up of interest as far as the characters you could unlock in Stardew Valley or Starlight Valley, Dreamlight Valley, whatever the Disney game is actually called, because fairly quickly you're unlocking like Goofy and Mickey, and so then you're gonna start getting into those second tier, and then very quickly into third tier, fourth tier characters. And if you're grinding away to unlock the third Chinese guy in Mulan, third Chinese bad guy, that you're really gonna quickly be scraping the bottom of the barrel. And there isn't a ton of difference between like unlocking Huey versus Dewey of the Scrooge McDuck nephews. Oh. Andrew Murphy on the chat says I made a math mech and I'm loving the deck. Okay, good to know. But yeah, in general, watching that quick look is the first time I have had any need to watch a quick look in probably 2 years. And it's the first time I've really seen anybody, whether it's Giant Bomb or anybody else, actually cover a game or play a game in the past couple of years in such a way that it actually informs me of what the game is. Because most games now, we have to admit, even over the course of the past couple of years, have gotten so much better about just showing what they actually are. And Dreamlight Valley is really failing to do that, so it feels like they're kind of ashamed of what their gameplay is. Because I can pretty much tell you what every other game is, or make an assumption. Perhaps that is in part because I'm looking at every single game that comes out on Steam, and I've just better sharpened my wit as far as understanding what a game is just based on a few screenshots. Andrew Murphy says I was able to get something scary with it, and access Code Talker with 10,600 attack. Which, okay. Alright, for the accountability section today, it's going to be fairly brief. I was just working on my Wi-Fi guest router, Raspberry Pi setup some more, just getting into some hardcore debugging. It's still very much a lot of my time yesterday was spent around just getting the script to work, and that took a lot of time, but I eventually did get it to work, so I'm fingers crossed 100% done with the mounting script to make folders and just arrange everything and set the folders to be available via Samba network sharing and secure FTP network sharing, and any videos and music and pictures put in specific folders should be streamable via a program called Mini DLNA, which streams videos over DLNA players, which is a pretty old technology, but there's no standard otherwise as far as just streaming music and videos, and it's a little surprising that Wi-Fi hasn't straight up tried to implement a standard, or the 802.11 specification board hasn't tried to implement a standard of just saying, hey, let's just put a streaming capability, a direct connect device-to-device streaming capability into the standard of Wi-Fi as it is, so players would be built into potentially operating systems instead of needing an app. But there's just so much competition between AirPlay and how they do it, and YouTube share buttons, and everybody wants to push everybody into an app. And generally, when somebody says the solution is an app, that is the wrong direction to go, in my opinion. Everybody always wants to make their own apps to put advertisements in it. And make it a worse experience instead of having a standard that anybody could program an interface to. But yeah, that's mostly what I was working on yesterday. I did try to play some of this yesterday and get ahead, but honestly, there are definitely points after an hour or so of playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Where I just can't bother to pay attention, and the time limit and losing because your time is running out really becomes even of a bigger problem than when I'm streaming, because I'm just not paying attention. I'm just got some kind of podcast or something going on my phone. I'm usually doing two things at once. It's very, very ADHD multitasking is how I tend to act and play when playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Off screen. So I played for a couple hours, and there's a decent chance we'll get to 11,000 points here to get the maximum amount of crystals, but I really don't think I'm getting much ahead of that, nor do I think I really care. Yeah, even now I'm playing on my phone while trying to get my mobile game dailies done as fast as possible. You see, the fact that I'm constantly coming back to these scenarios where I have a daily quest here. See, I just kind of need to win 4 games today, and I get to this point and get that 300 crystals, and I'll be happy with that. But then you have this daily quest of performing XYZs 4 more times to get 50 crystals, and then performing 15 synchro summons, which I'm I don't know how to even synchro summon. Really. I think I'd have to probably make something like a hero deck. Yeah, synchro summon is really more from the second Yu-Gi-Oh series that I didn't watch. So I don't have anything pre-built around that idea. I did plan on starting to play Zero Time Dilemma, I believe is the name, which is the third in the Nonary game series. And so I opened that app and then left it open and got distracted and went and didn't actually accomplish anything around that. So I have kind of picked the game I want to play, which is my visual novel, which will be weird, certainly, because that'll be like the only thing that airs pre-recorded on my channel. And at a certain level, I would feel like maybe I shouldn't do that. But that is where I think I want to go after playing a fairly high action game like Darksiders 3, playing a fairly low, a very low action game that is effectively a visual novel. Well, I'm imagining I probably should make 2 to 3 hour episodes minimum too, because it is a visual novel and it is going to have a lot of repetition even for a visual novel, knowing the Nonary series. And there's not going to be a easy way to get around get to rush through the game like that. Alright. Suppose there is always just a general desire to rush through the news, and I imagine today, this Wednesday, will be fairly simple as far as going through the video game news, and we should probably go through it and just free up myself. The other thing I was mostly working on as far as the project yesterday, which I'm not sure anybody cares about, is a setting up Borg backup, Borg B-O-R-G, like Star Trek. I'm just trying to figure out how that would best work. This experience definitely has had a lot of people just surrendering, and I don't know why that's the case. Like, I have not seen anybody else in any of the other festivals surrender this often, so I almost wonder if surrendering gives you a 50 reward. Because if surrendering does give you a 50 reward, then off screen I'll just surrender for non-stop. Like, that wouldn't bother me one bit to potentially surrender 100 times in a row and get 50 reward times 100, 5,000 points. That would get me halfway towards the end. This should be the last time I need to play out with this deck, and then we can actually play with some of the loner decks that would have a higher chance of winning. But I still kind of question whether any of the loner decks actually have synchro summon cards. Because if they don't have synchro summon cards, then that doesn't really benefit you much. I'm already feeling a little out of sorts again. My sleep schedule has decided to once again pivot, so I'm waking up about at noon, and I think generally when I am programming things, I tend to stay up later than I think I do. And sleep less. Alright. Yeah, I'm already yawning. It is insanely ridiculous how small the window is on some days for me between yawning because I'm still sleepy because I just woke up and yawning because I just I need to go back to sleep. In fact, it definitely was the case when I was in school that there was just I was just always sleepy. And that is the case for a lot of students, certainly, is that we just don't have a good sleep experience. And part of that definitely is the school hours are problematic, but part of that certainly was me too. But yeah, nothing ever fixed it either. Like, for a small period, I was prescribed sleeping pills as a probably far too young of a child to be on sleeping pills, and it really didn't do anything either. Like, undoubtedly, I was also yawning a lot in school because it was boring. Yeah, again, just a lot of surrendering. Alright, so let's see if we get through got through that daily quest. Or the festival quest, yeah. XYZ summoning monsters we don't need to do, so now it's just synchro summoning that we need to focus on. As far as daily things, these will happen almost certainly, but I also have 2 days to do solo modes, which yeah, I guess that gives me something to work on. Also, I can use solo mode to play my zoo game, whatever it's called, my old deck, and instead of playing my new deck, which I need to play on ranked. Odds are fairly high that this ranking season has only a couple days left too, so I'm not likely going to go anywhere or make it up to platinum this month, and that's always a problem with these festivals, is that they just become these big issues. Alright, now synchro summons. Synchro summons are the whites, I guessed, and these are XYZs. Okay, so there are no synchro summons at all in this deck, so that one's out, which is fine because Jolly Ghost Trick sucks anyways. This deck is all synchro summons, so obviously this is the one we want to play as, which is fine because that's also the one that I've been winning the most with. Alright. So we should do an experiment here. Just very quickly hop into a game and then surrender and see what reward we get. Because up until this point, surrendering gave you no reward whatsoever. There is like no ranking system here, so surrendering also doesn't hurt your rank at all. Surrender. So I'm defeated, I surrender. I get no reward for the duel pass. I get no reward for the duel score. I get no reward for this. So I have no idea why so many people are surrendering. And I wonder if it's not just that there's a bunch of bots that are programmed to surrender, whether those bots are made by the actual makers of Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters or just cheaters that in general are trying to help themselves and everyone else. Which at a certain point that is fairly benevolent to just have a bunch of bots with like fake accounts that don't matter surrendering so the players can win more often. There definitely have been festivals here that were way too much of a challenge. Alright, let's go through the Video Game Chronicles articles. Amazon Prime sale has been announced in an attempt to get you to spend money even earlier, and around that, around any Amazon Prime sales, every other big major people will also try to have their own sales, like Walmart, Target, places like that. Although all these sales are questionable whether they really are sales at all. And it is, I think, only realistic to say that they're exaggerating the idea that things will be out of stock or shortages. Right now, this year, compared to even last year, there really doesn't seem like there would be as big of a reason why things would be out of stock. And that they are just kind of rumor mongering and trying to use scare tactics to get you to buy extra things. Inherently, Western society, the United States in particular, has a problem in which they overspend in the last quarter of the year around Christmas and run up credit cards or just run up debt or deplete their savings accounts. And then they have to spend basically nothing around the rest of the year. When the smart shopper, that there are lists out there as far as what times of years to buy certain things, and like patio furniture right now, for example, would not likely still be on sale in October. So if you saw patio furniture on sale during this Prime Day sale, it's probably not really discounted or significantly discounted. And people certainly don't do the calculations around how much is it really costing you to buy something to have it sit in the garage for 3/4 of the year before you can even use it. I have personally seen that the Prime Day sales are really just good excuses to buy things if you need an excuse to buy things, and that's it. Like, most of the discounts aren't that good. Things that are on lightning deals tend to be weird things you would have never bought otherwise. I was doing somewhat decently around getting toys for little kids, but in my life I've run out of little kids that need gifts, and they have grown up to the point where now they're all into just Nintendo games and are going to give specific shopping lists around what they want and aren't young enough to not know the difference. So personally, the only thing I'm thinking maybe I would buy during this sale, other than if a Lego set was on sale and it was a decent deal, I'd get that always. But I'm thinking maybe I'll try and upgrade my irrigation system a little bit slowly. I need to. Right now, my irrigation system is controlling a lot of hoses that are sitting on top of the grass. It's time to start the slow process of digging trenches, or at least digging holes to put sprinkler heads actually in the ground, because I'm trying to do this irrigation system extremely cheaply compared to what you would have to pay anybody to do the whole project in a couple of weeks. But getting the piping, the connectors, the tools, all of that, like, likely none of it's going to be on sale. And so it would have been, for me, a lot nicer, and I think for most people a lot nicer, if Prime just gave you like 10% off your purchase in general. If they just actually bit into their own cut a little bit and said that this is how we're going to do it. Spend $100, we'll give you $10 back. Spend $50, we'll give you $5 back. Anything like that would be a much better deal. But that's pretty much all I'm thinking about getting. Remember, Amazon Prime has already had its early Prime Day sale, and now it's trying to have an October Prime Day sale. Almost certainly it's going to have some kind of Black Friday sale, even though Black Friday is mostly dead at this point. Like, the people are still going to push it. So yeah, you may have an October, a November, and a December sale, all on Amazon and everything else. This sale might work slightly well if they announce a new Kindle and you wanted a new Kindle, but I question how many people actively need or even use Kindles anymore. Like, Kindles as an idea probably stopped making a lot of sense unless you're a major book reader who hates actual physical books and doesn't have a phone with a decent battery on it. Yeah. And I just don't think there's that many people out there. I think major book readers love the feel of actually holding books, even if they are going through 3 or 4 books in a week. So I really don't know if there is that big of an audience for the Kindle. And noticeably, the Kindle and e-books, e-paper book things, really should have been something that schools or colleges adopted, and that never happened either, because it was way more profitable, and this is where capitalism corrupts, certainly. It's way more profitable in colleges to sell a book to somebody for $400 and have that physical book pretend like it's worth $400 than it is to sell a $400 digital access code alone, which that is how college books are sort of at this point. I think they are at the point where it's you pay $400 for a book you'll never open, and then you get a digital access code to just read it online. On top of that, then when you go back to sell that $400 books, you get like 20 bucks store credit. It's just a huge scam. But a lot of parts of college are certainly scams. I'm not doing a lot of synchro summoning here. I'm getting like 1 per turn. I don't think there's really any actual mention here of anything that actually would be on sale. So it's barely even video game news to talk about the Amazon Prime sale. I'm basically just giving general consumer advice at this point. But yeah, they're not teasing anything or hinting anything. It would be nice if these Prime sales had at least one big thing that they were pushing for. If you need a Xbox Series X or a PlayStation, you're probably still going to have a hard time getting it, and it's probably not going to be discounted. I guess we need to go into battle mode and then just end the turn here. I'm getting distracted. And certainly I would say Amazon Prime in general is becoming a less attractive offer, not a more attractive offer, as it were, because Prime Video is less of a good deal now with them shifting a significant amount of their content to ad required, even if you have Prime Video Freeview service. So you're just back to watching ads, and regardless of whether you have Prime Video or not. Which on that, on Freeview, I watched the second season of Drama World, and I will say it ends on a cliffhanger. Frankly, a cliffhanger that they show at the beginning of the first episode of season 2, and that does not spell good news for the series at all. Yeah, it is. It just ends on this cliffhanger where the first season didn't really. Well, no, I suppose there's a difference between ending on a cliffhanger, because the first season kind of had a tease to a sequel that ended on a bit of a cliffhanger. And then the second season literally just ends without any resolution to the narrative at all. Like, nothing happens at all. So if they did get a third season at all, there's no value in watching the second season. And arguably, I'd say there's probably not any value in watching the second season or future seasons anyway. Not to get too fat people hate on it, but the actress just looks so much different in a lot of different ways, also just being older, than she does in the first series, that you really don't feel a big connection to the first season at all. So I would recommend watching the first season of Duel World, which also was only like 15-minute episodes, and just ignoring everything else and just pretending like this sequel that came out years later doesn't matter. There's also weirdness in it that kind of at the last second, the storyline seems to be heavily pointing towards all the male actors in these Korean dramas are going to be the bad guys, and all the female, or at least most of the female actors in the K-dramas, are going to be the good guys. And they start to hint at that as they start to refer to the Drama World universe itself as a she, and there being a heavy, obvious allegory of the bad guys in the second season, the second lead's anonymous group, as really just turning into an allegory for involuntary celibate people. And so yeah, it goes in a weird direction from being a narrative that celebrates what people love about Korean dramas in the first season to a narrative that is just creating incels versus female heroines in it. Which at a certain point, I don't feel like in Korean dramas, of the ones I've watched, I've ever come off of it thinking, oh, that the female lead actress is secondary to the male lead actress. If anything, I find that the female lead actresses in a lot of Korean dramas are way more important and get way more screen time and way more of a focus. Yeah, even if the main story is following a male character, Hotel del Luna on that, Hotel de Luna or Del Luna, I think it's De Luna, on Netflix. Like, the main female lead there is somebody that you follow and really care about, whereas the main male character in Hotel del Luna is really secondary. It's not really a case that I've ever felt like Korean dramas just turn the female characters into arm candy for the male characters. If anything, they turn the male characters into arm candy sometimes. But I don't think it's categorically one way or the other. So pushing that narrative in drama world doesn't really make a lot of sense. And even pushing the narrative that second leads aren't important or don't get romances really doesn't make sense, because I'm fairly certain I've seen plenty of Korean dramas where the second lead has a second male lead has a romance that is a good B plot to a second female lead, or it's a good B plot to the A plot of the first lead male and female actresses romance. And while it's not a Korean drama, the manga His and Her Circumstances, or in my case the anime in which I watched based on the manga of His and Her Circumstances, literally shows a male lead and female lead fall in love and then gets bored with it and moves over to another, moves over to focusing on the second and the male second lead and the female second lead. Man, I'm twisting the words up. And that has nothing to do with video games either. And then this show, man, these streams really have just turned into me rambling. It really has always been an outlet for rambling, certainly, but I'm just getting worse and worse. Yeah, if I could afford it, I probably would need a producer or director to keep me on task and just say, hey, we're talking about this, just cover the news, don't get off on these side stories, although maybe people enjoy the side stories as much as they enjoy anything else. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend Drama World 2. I wouldn't recommend Amazon Prime Video, which means I really wouldn't recommend Amazon Prime in general, unless you just are really benefiting from the free shipping, which is questionable even at that, because it's very possible you would get free shipping for everything you buy on Amazon anyways. As far as other things you get that are video game related to Amazon Prime, like free Twitch subscriptions and things like that, those potentially are going to fall apart as Twitch is falling apart. So yeah, and that's pretty much it. It's just like Twitch Prime Video, Amazon Prime games, and the free games, somewhat nice but not amazing. And then there's a bunch of other Amazon services that a lot of people aren't going to really need to take advantage of or think to take advantage of, like Amazon Pharmacy or PillPack or Woot. And I don't know if all of those really even require a Prime subscription, or any of those actually require Prime subscription. Alright. Video Games Chronicles, I would say, probably doesn't seem like they've got a lot of new news here, because we had already covered this mineral camo Xbox Series X controller. Although it looks kind of like an Elite Series 2, not quite enough like an Elite Series 2 to think it is one for this one screenshot. So a slightly different color shade of black, potentially, may be the really only the difference there. And if anything, that highlights the pointlessness of talking about leaks around controllers. And if you don't have a full picture there, or if you don't have a full list of potential new features to go alongside it, then there is not really a reason to talk about it at all. And yeah, maybe I should curate the news a little bit better. Like Battlefield 2042's latest updates, including a reworked version of the renewal map. Okay, if you're interested in Battlefield 2042, check that out. A new Assassin's Creed Valhalla update adds 3 more puzzle-focused tombs. We talked about that at the end of the last stream. Which, yeah, I would like the Assassin's Creed games to have had all of its content at launch, but they're definitely not trying to do that. Multiversus new update makes it twice as long to level up fighters. This is to help make it a bit more of a journey, the developers say. Which, yeah, they're definitely, from the outside looking in, feels like there's enough of a rabid fandom out there that is playing Multiversus while it still is in this kind of beta phase where they're still tweaking things a lot and adding characters. I wouldn't be surprised if they completely wipe progress on the game when they ever decide to stop calling it an early access game. But then there is also a weirdness that you're leveling up characters at all in what is a Smash Brothers clone, because I don't believe there's a logical reason why you would level up characters in a Smash Brothers clone, unless you're just trying to make an experience that is significantly different. Alright, well, if I'm gonna have any chance of winning here, let's see, Video Games Chronicle says the God of War and Ragnarok's DualSense controller is now available for the UK pre-order. Which, okay. I'm still a little confused as somebody who hasn't paid enough attention to the different controllers that are available, whether there is a DualShock 3 that actually is at a level of quality that would compare to the DualSense controller, or if it is still a situation where the DualSense is probably your best bet, but the DualSense notably is missing something? Or is it the DualShock 3 is missing something? Because I don't think there's an Elite Pro controller equivalent on the PlayStation side that is obviously the right one to get and the only one you would consider getting. Like, let's see, the FIFA 23 Ultimate Team servers are down. Update EA says players now should be able to connect to the servers again. So the servers went down. Which, okay. That seems premature, very, very premature for a server to go down. Microsoft has launched a new special edition Xbox Series X and S. The mineral camo controller is available for $70 or £60. And the picture here of the official release looks completely different than the picture they were using before. Which, that's weird that you would bother to use a picture at all. Certainly Video Games Chronicles and other video game news sites have gotten ridiculous about just demanding that there must be a certain number of pictures. There must be a picture right below the headline. There must be a picture halfway in the fold. If anything, it's probably to balance out ads that they're showing that my ad blocker is just blocking. But yeah, mineral camo. I can see it. It does have kind of like that coral mineral look to it. Notably, you really only can get one color on the thumbsticks and the buttons and the D-pad, and maybe that's intentional, but more than likely I imagine that it's fairly easy to... I would assume that this is kind of like laser printed or into the mold as this color, or like, yeah, that would be my assumption. I doubt they're doing something crazy with the plastic shell, like dipping it. So what I would guess it is that it is probably pigment of some sort in the plastic that is cured and heated in the process of forming it to get the exact pattern. So there probably is some kind of pigment printer that they do to get that pattern. And I bet that pigment printer really can only work with that specific type of plastic and can't work with the other things at a certain level of accuracy. Also, if you're a little bit off to the left or right, I imagine nobody would really notice. As far as anything different in the insides of this controller, it seems like that is definitely not the case. So, and that's not particularly surprising either. I think at a certain level this is probably not healthy for society. I don't want to generally live in a like pure communist society where everybody gets a black car and wears a white shirt and like brown slacks, and that there's no way to personalize things yourself, or at least decorate yourself to be colorful. I do appreciate colors, certainly, but at a certain point the tie-dye movement was kind of about taking that white shirt and making something yourself that is unique to yourself and only yourself, instead of potentially buying a tie-dye shirt that has been pre-tie-dyed at a store. There's a certain level of stupidity around doing that. And when you're talking about $70 controllers of which you probably aren't going to need an extra controller ever. It is silly that they sell such a variety around that. Like, and when you look at like the Xbox Series X and S and the controllers that come with it, that works fairly nicely. Just being black controllers or white controllers, just keeping it fairly simple. And it probably doesn't take too much to change your manufacturing plant to have the camo style of controllers made versus just the standard black controllers, but it does certainly come off as wasteful that people are wasting their time thinking up of new designs. Although ideally you would want to be able to sell a white controller and then sell away to paint or build or pigment your own controller, to the point where maybe you could just upload a photo and have it custom printed on the controller. That is the idea of like 3D printing, certainly. Yeah, and I guess you could be making controllers like that with a color 3D printer, laser pigment 3D printer might work. I doubt that's how they're really doing it in the factory though. That would be too slow and expensive. That was one of the things certainly that e-ink potentially had a future in, and we may still at some point see that. There was one really fancy car that had like an e-ink skin on it, so you could literally change the color of the car, which is no way that would ever be street legal. Not without a lot of lobbying. So yeah, if the entire shell of products had like a very low resolution e-ink that could shift between several different colors, there might be something to that. Of course, the problem with that is, for the technology of color e-inky paper, it really is just red, blue, and greens, and so you'd have to go fairly high resolution to have red, blue, and green next to each other to make it work and actually look like something instead of just being dots of red, blue, and green that might look like something from 10 feet away. At a certain level, I suppose you could have a waterproof shell, or it doesn't even really potentially have to be waterproof. You could have a clear shell, and then you could have cavities around any controller, and then you could fill it with ink or pigment for any specific color. That, if you wanted a custom color that way, there would just be like a little hole in the back that you screw the cap off of and filled with different colored sand, like pigment. Yeah, that could work. I'm rambling now. This has very little to do with what is actually going on in video game worlds. Far Cry 6 expansion and Game of the Year edition have seemingly linked. Almost certainly there would have been a Game of the Year edition, although it's going to be fairly ridiculous. It's going to be very, very ridiculous this year to see anything claimed to be a Game of the Year when there's basically been no games out this year and there's been very little sales this year. And if anything, every year as time goes forward, the concept of a game of the year becomes more and more ridiculous, and it becomes very much a feeling like you're scraping the bottom of the barrel. Yeah, I would really have to think about whether or not there was a game that I would even dare to call Game of the Year this year. Somebody calls somebody with a really long name, Mobile Games for Phone Reviews BG, on the chat says, do you want to play against me? The answer to that, unfortunately, is no. I'm not playing against anybody until Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel makes it a lot easier to play against other people and actually rewards you for playing against other people. And even in that scenario right now, there's this Synchro XYZ festival going on that I have 1 day left to do, and there's the rank season about to end in a couple of days that I should do. So there's just no reason anybody should be doing friendly games at this point at all. Like, ideally, going as far down this reward path to get as many legacy pack tickets is still a good idea. Getting a title is not super appealing to me, but I'll take it. And that's at 22,000. I'm at 13,000, and you get 500 each victory. I'm also still working on the quests. We've got all kinds of new daily quests that needs to be done. I need to do this solo quest. A new Duel Live I need to spectate. I've done 19 synchro summons. I need to do 11 more. So that's going to be hard to do, but if I do pull it off, then I probably will be close to getting 22,000. Yeah, Far Cry getting an expansion is probably more surprising than it getting a Game of the Year edition, because Game of the Year edition has always been just an excuse to resell the same game with adding in DLC that should have been involved in the first game. But Far Cry 6 also here is not even showing the character from Far Cry 6, the main bad guy. It's instead showing the main characters from like 4, 5, and 3, I think. Which is an interesting way to just like underemphasize the bad guy in 6. In all ways, I think the Far Cry formula worked really well in Far Cry 3, and they stuck to that formula too much in Far Cry 4, and it still sort of worked there, but then it started to really break down in 5 and break down in 6 as the years has passed. Because, like, if there's 2 to 4 years between each release of a Far Cry game, which probably not, they probably did, they probably rushed out Far Cry games, but let's say there was just 2 years between 3 and 4, and then another 2 years before 4 and 5, and another 2 years between 5 and 6. You're talking 6 years there, probably closer to 10 years difference, in which you really can't sell the same game over and over again. You can, but it's not going to do anything amazing or catch people's attention. Yep. Let's see. EA is reportedly releasing the game Wild Hearts that was just announced in early 2023. We don't really know anything about this game, Wild Hearts. I suspect it will be a Monster Hunter competitor. Here's an interesting story. Joker voice lines by Mark Hamill, which is the guy who plays Luke in Star Wars, but also did voice acting for the Joker in Batman the Animated Series, I believe, have reportedly been found in multiverses. He was generally believed to be the best Joker voice actor, is the sub headline, and I can imagine that I would probably tend to agree with that. Although it is fairly noticeable that this Joker from Batman the Animated Series, while this does feel like the Joker to me, he doesn't feel like the Joker of modern time by far. But whatever Joker you are thinking about as far as the Joker of modern times, most of them do seem to be fairly in line with each other and fairly interchangeable in the minds of people. The voice actor, not the actor in the suit that played Darth Vader in the original trilogy, but the voice actor of Darth Vader has signed away his rights to his voice, which is insane, but probably an indication that he's getting so old that, or his voice has changed and is becoming damaged. He's signed away the rights to his voice and sold it, and he's retiring from the character of Darth Vader, which is probably he's probably already said he's retiring from everything else, that was the last thing he was doing. That definitely paints this weird picture, and this extremely dangerous picture where face and identity rights and voice rights are just going to be owned by companies like Disney in this case, and there will just be no room for new actors and new voice actors at all. The voice acting community is already incredibly tiny and fairly incestuous in the sense that it just hires the same people over and over again. Part of that is argued because voice acting is actually very hard and not that many people can actually do it, but I think a lot of that is definitely who you know and where you are. Also, because if you're not in one of the 3 or 4 major areas in which voice acting happens, you're not going to get hired for enough voice acting jobs to become a professional at it. And it's not like people who do succeed to become voice actors become super rich. So at a certain point it almost feels like it might be better to be like the Japanese systems, where I don't think the Japanese voice actors, they're called seiyuu, are paid particularly much better than Western voice actors, but I think they are paid a little bit better, relatively speaking, and I think they are given way more respect. But then there also feels like there's a way higher chance that you could come in as a voice actor and as a new voice actor and get roles and get work. Which one do I want to pick? I'll take this one. But yeah, we definitely are at a dangerous position where we will have a last generation of we will have a last generation of face actors and on-stage actors and voice actors. On-stage actors will probably be the last to go, but yeah, everything may just become artificial intelligence, AI. And the only hope is that laws would get passed to say, well, if you're using a computer program to simulate somebody's voice, then that is not copyrightable content, and that potentially movies are less and less going to be considered creative works and protected under copyright if every part of it is just being done by a computer. Although that's not really the way the laws are going now, because as long as you're scripting what the computer is saying, then you're putting more than enough human creative input into it. It would have to get to a point where they're using artificial intelligence to write the scripts, and then having artificial voice actors do the dialogue of the scripts. And honestly, copyright is just going to have to severely increase its penalties against companies and its lack of protection against companies that are not actually hiring humans and employing humans. But that's the problem with capitalism in general, is that at some level, laws to protect companies were laws to protect people who are employing other people and keeping all of society in jobs and fed and just in general busy and not deciding to revolt. But more and more, there are fewer and fewer people that are actually being employed in a lot of companies. But yeah, I really don't have time for another rant, so let's move on. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Diablo 4 in-game beta invites are being sent out. Select players can sample what's available after the game's campaign. Which, okay. I heard a comparison of Diablo 4 to, I want to say Land's End. No, Lost Ark, I think is what someone was comparing it to. And not being really familiar with Lost Ark, I don't know what the comparison really means in that case, but it seems to imply that that Diablo 4 is being designed to have a lot of dailies and a lot of gimmicks to get you to play it every single day and come back to it. And I don't know if that really means at some level there's going to be some minimal loot boxes in Diablo 4, or just a lot of microtransactions, or just a general monthly service or occasional DLC. At a certain point, as a person who played Diablo 1 pretty much and Diablo 2, what I want to see in a Diablo is for it to be kind of this standalone experience that you pay for once and doesn't have any microtransactions. And since there needs to be a bit of an evolution, the evolution really should be to get around the idea of playing the games multiple times just to get the numbers to go up. And really, I just want a storyline experience that's fairly decent from the beginning to the end of a Diablo 4 that I would play once and then put down and never play again. And even the grindiness of clicking the mouse a lot is not something I'm really wanting in a Diablo 4. I'd want to see more optimization. Ironically, had Diablo Immortal not been so greedy, there is a better fit for what Diablo is on a mobile game, where the characters would just play themselves and walk from one enemy encounter to another enemy encounter and then immediately start swinging on people, to effectively turn it into just a grindy, almost slight light clicker game. But you still want fairly good storyline around something like that. We have someone on the chat's named, I think that's Pascual Salvucci, saying branded Despedia or Sword Soul. I have no idea. I am very uninformed as far as Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters. I'm a very light free-to-play player. I have only been able to manage to make 2 meta decks. And so when people ask me about other meta decks, I have no idea. I could only say I've heard of Sword Soul, but a lot of these meta decks, when people are talking about them, they use like one word to describe the meta deck when there's many different variants on that one meta deck. I've not seen the phrase branded Despedia. So that's all I can really say there. Video Games Chronicle says new Overwatch 2 users will have to play 100 matches to unlock all the original heroes. In-game chat and competitive modes will also be locked until players meet a certain requirements. That's an interesting thought of gatekeeping. Yeah, I mean, you really can't call it anything other than gatekeeping, in that they're just trying to stop people from making new accounts and then immediately getting in the chat and spamming hate messages and then getting banned and then making a new account. Of course, the problem here is it probably isn't going to be that hard to get bots or cheats that would play that first 100 matches, or however many matches it actually requires to get in-game chat and competitive modes. Meanwhile, you're kind of punishing the players to play quite a lot without the original heroes, but also that makes them play with the new heroes, which are probably the characters you should be playing with anyways. And that is only for new players. So if you are an old player and you're moving your account over, those characters would still be unlocked. I guess inherently this also says you should probably, if you plan on playing Overwatch 2, make an Overwatch 1 account if you haven't right now, to get out of that nonsense very early. I definitely am benefiting from connection failures too. Yeah, something happened on my Wi-Fi, and I don't know if it was just me changing the Wi-Fi name back to the same for 5 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz to have the same SSID Wi-Fi name. But something flipped. Something went wrong, and then my Wi-Fi smoke detector couldn't connect, and I spent yesterday probably an hour trying to fix that and figure out what was wrong, and at the end of the day I just loaded up a weekly backup and just said, forget it. I'll just reload this backup. As soon as I reloaded the backup, everything worked. So it might be the case that the 5 gigahertz thing band does need to stay separated. Although this is a very odd scenario because what it's actually saying is that the 5 gigahertz band has to be a different SSID for my main connections, because I was putting all of the smart devices on their own separate secondary network that has a different SSID. So it's not like a direct connection. Changing the name of one thing to another and then having a completely separate third thing stop working doesn't really make a lot of sense, but who knows how the coding actually works. It leaves enough questions in my head and enough ambiguity, to use a big word and mispronounce it in the effort, that I probably will give it a week or two and then try and change the name back and see if it does the same thing. But yeah, with a custom DDWRT router, the Wi-Fi settings, really you should just by default try to leave them as much at the default settings and not try and tweak anything, because it is just so easy to make a mistake and end up with a completely non-functional system. As far as Wi-Fi settings go. Let's see, the GTA 6 hacker suspect, which really it'd be better to say suspected GTA 6 hacker and put that right up front, has pled not guilty to computer misuse charges. The teenager has also been linked, allegedly, to Uber, Microsoft, and Nvidia security breaches, which the fact that you could hack one of these companies is surprising. The fact that you might have been able to socially engineer or hack 4 companies is just a tragedy as far as poor security industry wide. But yeah, innocent until proven guilty, maybe in the UK isn't as much of a thing, but pleading not guilty is almost certainly the right move. Although you're pretty much screwed as soon as the police arrest you in most scenarios. There's just no way getting around that thought. As soon as you're in the system, as soon as they have you in what is effectively a system designed to funnel people into being put into jail and convicted, you're pretty much screwed. Moving on, since there's really no story there, it's literally a one-sentence story. Infinity Ward has outlined Modern Warfare 2 changes planned following the beta. Activision also claims the beta was Call of Duty's biggest yet. I guess check out this article if you care about Modern Warfare 2. I don't. It gets talked about way too much for my own preference. Of that. Really no reason to get rid of that. Let's see. The Dark Pictures anthology version stories of Man of Medan and Little Hope are getting free current gen upgrades. We are at the point where Xbox Series X and S and the PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 5 Slim should be referred to as current gen. Switch is doing its own thing, and you would definitely call it last gen at best, if not previous gen, yeah, I don't know how you would phrase that. Like, or really, I guess you would call it maybe third newest gen, and you'd call the PlayStation, Xbox One, and the PlayStation 4 second newest gen. Last gen would be better if it was describing like first generation consoles, like the Atari and the ColecoVision, things like that. But that's not how they use it. It's always nice to see games getting little updates, though, and visual updates. Those games in particular are very much close to a Telltale type QuickTime event visual novel done from a Western perspective story narrative game. So if the visuals don't look good, you're particularly in a bad place. Anyways, so for a product like that to keep its relevancy and keep selling, it needs upgrades. Also, Unity engine, Unreal Engine, not particularly hard to upgrade the it's not particularly hard to upgrade the newest versions of those engines and make the graphics look a little bit better without really putting a lot of effort into it. Let's see. Video Games Chronicle says Team Ninja says it isn't outsourcing a new Ninja Gaiden game. I don't know why they're specifically saying that. The studio president Fumihiko Yasuda says a new series entry would need all the pieces to fit, which at a certain point this is probably the right response you want to hear, is you don't want Team Ninja to say, oh, we're just going to let somebody else make a Ninja Gaiden game and potentially ruin the series that we've named our company off of. But also, the Ninja Gaiden series is in this unique position where there's not quite enough demand to make a new Ninja Gaiden game. I don't know if that many people really want a Ninja Gaiden game or would play a Ninja Gaiden game. So we are kind of left with the Ninja Gaidens we have. One of the things I was going to say about Far Cry, now that I remember it, was that Far Cry 4 going to Far Cry 5, in a lot of ways, or Far Cry 3 going to 4 in particular, is the opposite event that happened with Resident Evil 4. If you take the general idea that Far Cry 3 and Far Cry 4 were games that slightly changed how those series worked and were very successful, Far Cry 3 going to 4 did basically the exact same thing, whereas Far Cry 5 tried to change it up a little bit, and they went in the wrong direction, and they definitely, I would say, went in the wrong direction by the time they're at Far Cry 6. At Resident Evil 6. I'm getting things confused in my head. Um, so it makes a odd scenario where the Resident Evil series, if you look at Far Cry, Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6, with 4 being the only one that was really liked, and then 5 and 6 being increasingly hated. And then you look at Far Cry 3, 4, and 5, with all those games being decreasingly liked, but relatively not hated. The Resident Evil series almost counterintuitively shows that experimenting when developing a game is important, and trying something different is important, even if you are going to fail for 2 games in a row. Because when you look at Resident Evil 7, which then once again tries to do something very different and is very much loved because it does that different thing, well, Resident Evil 7 is the one success out of the 3 previous games, between 5 and 6 and 7, whereas Far Cry 6 is still just doing the same old, and there's no chance that Far Cry 6 was going to be really well received when it is just doing the same old. And inherently, because there's room for attempts at more experimentation in the Resident Evil series compared to the Far Cry series, there are actually more games in the same time period that were released, because there were also side games and DLC that were more prevalent around the Resident Evil series. So yeah, don't be afraid to fail is really the lesson I think people should take away from that, particularly in game development, is that you shouldn't be afraid to fail, and you should be willing to do something different and experiment. Remember, all I'm trying to do right now is get these synchro summons as much as possible, and anything else is gravy. So if I was to tie that back to Ninja Gaiden games, yeah, they should make a new Ninja Gaiden game, but they should probably experiment with the idea and the concept a little bit more. Like, the one Ninja Gaiden game that I've played was like one of the worst Xbox Ninja Gaiden games, and yeah, it was not anything that I received well or thought well of. I probably at this point should stop playing, and just focus on the news, but I'm not going to do that today. I'm going to do things a little different, since we're trying to get as many victories as possible. Let's see, Video Games Chronicles says Splatoon 3 players are upset about a glitch that lets players shoot through the floor. I assume this will be fixed at some point fairly quickly. EA and Koei Tecmo premiere Wild Hearts trailer and confirm a February release. Let's actually look at the trailer, because that is the thing. My screen just blanked out. I've been noticing my screen has been blacking out on occasions. More and more. I'm hoping it's just a driver. I had problems with my computer and graphics card, and if all of a sudden this video card somehow is breaking now again, or having trouble, that would really suck. I haven't ever gotten around to the point of putting the case back on my computer, and At this point I should put the case back on. Should probably dust it and then put the case back on and just hope that everything is good. It's not 100% uncommon for things to black out, particularly with like OBS open and streaming, but it's weird, to say the least. Right. Summon this first before we do anything else. Banish that, I guess. Create a token. Special summon here. I think we could very potentially win completely. I think what I need to do is probably make this our last game for today. Burn through the news and then play some off screen to try and get further, which odds aren't 100% great that I would actually put the attention span and into playing more, but yeah, I'm not going to get through the news in a reasonable amount of time if I don't do something like that. So yeah, potentially, sorry, I'm just going quiet there. We're getting rewards. I wouldn't say great rewards. Like potentially I stop here, or potentially I play for the rest of today and try to get up to 22,000. Even if I don't get up, just 2 victories in general get you 2 legacy packs, which legacy packs are still somewhat worth it. I do have a motivating factor to do 5 more synchro summons to get this done for 50 gems, and I also need to do solo mode, which doing that off screen would make a lot of sense. Alright, let's watch this trailer though. Let's see. So you've got a monster, you've got a kind of ninja guy, and he seems to build up these platforms to get up higher to attack the guy. It definitely feels very Japanese centric, more than the Monster Hunter series in general would. Any specific time of the like Shogun era of Japan, I would guess, or what is that called, Shogunate. But some of this definitely seems just straight out of the playbook of a Monster Hunter game. Maybe there is more of an action aspect to it, Seems like these monsters might be very connected to nature, and so they affect the environment around them in some levels. But yeah, it does kind of come off as there might be a limited number of monsters. There might be more of a storyline action experience, but I don't know if I really believe that, because then you see a whole mechanism system to get very high up as far as these towers as a gimmick. That's a slightly different gimmick. And then having different types of weapons is a slightly different gimmick. It looks like you'll be fighting in groups of people like Monster Hunter tends to go. And I would kind of assume that some of that is online play. This might be a Japanese company's attempt at something like Fortnite, where they don't want the player versus player idea, but they do want the building concept, which Fortnite without building is already a major way in which most people are playing Fortnite, I suspect, so they're late to the party on that idea. But yeah, a Japanese attempt at a Fortnite might be what they're going for. Otherwise, the more obvious is just a Japanese attempt at copying Monster Hunter, a different Japanese game. Moving on, Video Games Chronicles last article for today. The October's PlayStation Plus Essential Games have been announced. It includes Hot Wheels Unleashed, Injustice 2, and Super Hot, which are all somewhat old games. Hot Wheels Unleashed was a game I had hoped would have been a little bit better and a little bit cheaper, so the cheaper part would be covered for PlayStation Plus people. Better part I don't think you're gonna get. For the Gematsu articles, we have Jean Yu Sword 7 coming to the Switch in 2023. We can burn through that quickly. IGI Origins gameplay has a reveal trailer. I don't recognize a game called IGI Origins. It does have a Steam page, so it might be faster to look at the Steam page than it is to look at the Gematsu article. Yeah, it looks like a kind of dark first-person shooter, and that's about it. Doesn't really have a release date or anything, so I really shouldn't put it on the follow list. So if we jump through this trailer, there's a decent level of visuals here. It seems like it's military versus military, so maybe this is an attempt at doing a stealth game like Metal Gear Solid without having to invoke all the problems around the Metal Gear Solid series as far as its weird story and Konami being involved. There might be something there, but they really aren't showing a lot right now, which I think that also highlights the problem with the idea of putting out trailers or making Steam pages in particular when you don't have a lot to show. Let's see. A free title update is now available for the Capcom Fighting Collection. Quality of life improvements, new accessibility options, and more. So, this is a, I imagine, Darkstalkers minigame that they're showing as the screenshot. But yeah. Notably, not a lot of people have talked about the Capcom Fighting Collection, and I don't think a lot of people are. There is, I imagine, a very large difference between the people who are nostalgic for old fighting games, old Capcom fighting games in particular, like Darkstalkers, which might include me, but I never really played fighting games, so I'm not that nostalgic for them. And then there are the people who are playing fighting games today that don't know anything about the old fighting games and don't care because the old fighting games just don't matter and they don't play the same way, they don't look the same way. Even a middle ground really doesn't exist, so people interested in, say, Street Fighter 4 probably aren't that interested in Street Fighter 1. People interested in Street Fighter 2 aren't even interested in Street Fighter 1. That's probably a bad example. But some of those Blaze Blue games, some of the early Blaze Blue games and things like that are probably not worth playing either. And you would really just want to play the newest Blaze Blue game if you're going to play any Blaze Blue game. A game called Clea and Clea 2 for the PS4 launches September 30th, and obviously this is some kind of horror game. Noticeably only for the PlayStation 4, so I would question if this game is already out on everything else. Yes, it's currently available. Both titles are currently available for Xbox One, Switch, and PC via Steam. So the horror adventure game, late to the party in the PlayStation world, probably very much because PlayStation just doesn't care about weird niche games or horror games or what it feel like probably are Japanese games. It's from Sekai Project as the publisher. They're calling it an adventure game, which seems a little weird because it kind of, I would suspect, is closer to a visual novel, but maybe it has a bit of an adventure RPG maker aspect to it, would be my guess. A game called The Inquisitor launches Q4 in 2023. It's published by Calypso Media. I haven't heard any actual news statement from Video Game Donkey as far as his publishing company idea, Big Mode, whether that was really even a thing or a joke. He certainly is in a probably great position to just say, nope, that was a joke. I was never going to do that, because he definitely has gotten pushback from a lot of people who don't have faith in him actually being capable of being a publisher. But I could also see him just being inflamed and inspired to show the haters they're wrong and just double down on it. If it really was a thing that was a real company and it wasn't a joke, he's probably invested too much money even at this early point to just cancel everything, shut everything down, and say, oh no, it actually was a joke. But I could see him certainly just also say silent, and we would just, in a week or a month or whenever the next Video Game Donkey video comes out, him just covering a game and doing his character and never mentioning anything about Big Mode. Inherently, as a publisher, if he was going to announce Big Mode, he needed to have a game that was coming out in 6 months or a couple of weeks or out right now. Since he doesn't have a game that he can point to say, hey, we've already done it, we've already made the contracts, and we've got a game ready to buy right now, he effectively made an announcement for a company to a video game audience that would have wanted to buy a game. The kind of announcement he made would have made a lot more sense to investors and like angel investors to buy stock in a company, not end user game purchasers. Moving on, A Plague Tale Requiem has a story trailer. Since I haven't gotten around to playing the first Plague Tale game, I definitely wouldn't want to watch the story trailer for the sequel. Gotham Knights has a PC features trailer highlighting 4K resolution, ultra high frame rate, ultra wide monitor support, and more, which I think it's going to be fairly quickly obvious that PC feature trailers probably don't need to be made, because there always was this kind of idea of having there was always this idea of having a mod, or the potential of a game being modded to higher resolutions or ultra widescreen resolutions. They still very much are hinting that Batman is dead and gone, which still leaves you in this weird position where this feels like this is very much going to be a game where you're basically doing Arkham City or Arkham Asylum still, but you are just playing as one of 4 characters. Maybe you get to pick at all times, maybe you don't. And I still very much don't really believe that Batman is going to be gone. I feel like he's going to show up either in the first act or in the half act. I don't even really think they would just tease a Batman coming back at the end of Arkham Knights. Moving on, Sharon's Staircase launches October 28th. This is a first-person horror mystery game. Guess we have some screenshots here that are fairly dark. But yeah, that could be something and it could be nothing. Like, this is very reminiscent of a lot of kind of asset flip horror games, and the level of quality being fairly high for asset flip horror games on PC still. So it's very hard to tell whether something's worth mentioning or not. Although I don't think Gamatsu really tries to tell or curate their articles. I think they pretty much write an article based on any press release and information they get, which definitely explains why they often have twice as many articles compared to Video Games Chronicles. And the Video Games Chronicles and Gamatsu have way more articles than GameDeveloper.com, which barely has 3 or 4 in a couple days. King of Fighters 15 DLC characters launch October 4th. I'm not going to bother to name the characters, they're there on the screen. There is something I would say, looking at these 4 characters in their flat images, where I have a little bit more nostalgia for the appearance of these characters, even though, like, this girl is almost certainly brand new. And obviously they're in their 3D models, they look different. But at least this feels kind of in line with what you would expect from fighting games as far as an animation style, compared to the newest Street Fighter teaser trailers we've seen and screenshots, where the newest Street Fighter characters are just way too muscly and way too weirdly proportioned. A game called Shadow Remastered Deluxe launches November 2nd. This looks like it's a side-scrolling shooter, if I was to guess. But maybe it is more of an arcadey, the shots bounce around experience. Yeah, it's a side-scrolling shooter slash Arkanoid clone. But yeah, there might be something to that. Arkanoid as a concept does need more to it, and it really hasn't evolved over the years. So Shatter might be a decent way of fixing problems. Turning at 90 degrees makes a lot of sense, since Arkanoid originally would have been on monitors and TVs that were rotated to be more vertical, whereas almost every monitor these days are more horizontal as far as gameplay playing is concerned. a little surprised we aren't getting to a point where we start to get more horizontal phones by default as far as cell phones. A game called The Finals pre-alpha gameplay trailer is available, which was this tagged as the first-person shooter. There has been, I imagine, kind of a shortage of first-person shooter games in general in the past couple of years, and I don't know if there's really a good enough reason for that. Like, I would have to assume what it is that a lot of game companies went to their bases and said, well, if we own Call of Duty, we're going to only make Call of Duty. We're not going to make a Call of Duty and a different first-person shooter game that's more experimental and that is unknown. And then it's possible that some of the companies that would have in the past created a Call of Duty clone just didn't bother to do that because they were slowed down in the pandemic and ran out of money, ran out of time. Yeah. This game, The Finals, seems to be heavily focused around the ability to spray foam and transition and parkour, which does something a little bit different. Yeah, so there might be something to this. Genshin Impact version 3.1 update is now available. We're still getting lots of updates around Genshin Impact, although I think enthusiasm around Genshin Impact is probably dead. There is a long list of changes that were made there. As far as enthusiasm, getting new characters or new players, that's what I mean, around Genshin Impact, I think that's probably mostly dried out. If you're playing Genshin Impact, you're probably still going to play Genshin Impact. If you've played and stopped playing Genshin Impact, you're probably not coming back. And for mobile gaming, while it is very nice that Genshin Impact stands above the rest as far as a nicely polished visual game and a decent game, I think, to actually play, it's still not amazingly great, and it needs way more competition. There needs to be other companies out there really trying, instead of there just being a ton of garbage games. Let's see, the creature battle simulation game Ishu Saikyo Ou Zukan Battle Coliseum has been announced for Switch. I suspect this might be a Japanese only game. Monsters fighting monsters. A lot of Japanese text. Yeah, I don't know if that would really play in the Western world, to have a fighting game between real monsters and giant centipedes, which I think at that size are not real, or extinct dinosaurs as we imagined them to look when we first started getting enthusiastic around dinosaurs. Even though now it's fairly well assumed that dinosaurs would be colorful and covered in feathers. So in a lot of ways, well, I wouldn't say dinosaurs aren't real. I would say the way we think of dinosaurs is mostly inaccurate. Like, this almost feels like it could have been something like a card game turned into a digital game, where you just have pictures of specific animals and doing what if thoughts of what if a elephant fought a giant centipede, and they were the same size. Let's see, I think what I want to do is let's go through some of the games that came out on Steam, and then we'll go back to the Gamatsu articles. Horde here is more in line with an asset flip zombie first-person shooter, which definitely, if I was just talking about first-person shooters instead of good first-person shooters, we still are seeing plenty of things like this. But the problem with a game like this is that even though it's kind of positively reviewed, it's just not really showing anything that I'd want to play. There's not quite enough polish around the polygons. It's a little low polygon, and an open world survival zombie game without the highest of high levels of polish is not going to catch my attention. Here we have one called Hentai Nazi Girl, so I'll make sure that's YouTube family friendly. Although having the word hentai in the name usually increases the chance of it being actually family friendly. Notably, you have a topless anime girl running around a low effort asset flip first person shooter, but all you're really seeing is side boob, and they programmed it so bad she's holding this gun that is literally clipping through her entire chest. And so in one screenshot, fairly zoomed in here, you can see the entire butt of the gun clipping through her chest and this side boob. Incredibly low effort game. And that is under the adults only section, which, yep, we are desperately looking for quality as far as adults only games, and constantly being disappointed with very low quality stuff. Although in all fairness, if you go to like Pornhub, there's probably a lot of like amateur submissions of porn videos that are very, very low quality for every one high quality professionally made porn shoot that's on Pornhub. And yeah, you just don't see the low quality submissions very often because they are buried, because they're not upvoted, as it were, or however Pornhub does its thing, whatever Pornhub does these days. Haven't checked it out in a while. Moving on, as far as video games, Moonscars, we knew that was coming out, and it is out, so I'll put it on the fall list. Although, honestly, there's no real reason here as a Metroidvania dark visuals game. There really is no reason here to not just go ahead and put it on the wish list. It's 72% positive, so maybe I could be a little bit cautious and put it on the fall list and check, but I think it's just easier to put it on the wish list now, and if I decide to actually buy games anytime soon, then I'll double check the reviews at that point to make sure it's still popular, and I'll make a YouTube short around that. Also, I was trying to wait till we get to an article, but I haven't seen it so far, so I'll just mention it now. Steam, I have to use the right words here. This Dark Ill, does this support English? Yeah. I'll give this a follow. Looks like a Darkest Dungeon clone. Steam has announced that they are not going to have a Chinese Lunar New Year sale in 2023. Instead, having a spring sale, which almost certainly points to a general admittance that the Lunar New Year sale didn't ever really work, in part because Chinese and Japanese game companies really didn't want to discount their games very much, so you weren't able to get thematically connected games actually discounted during a Chinese or Asian New Year event. But also, I imagine this heavily points out that the separated Chinese version of Steam has probably plateaued, and they are admitting that now. At the very least, they are either admitting that the Chinese version of Steam has plateaued, or they're admitting that They no longer want to try and target Asians who aren't buying on the Chinese version of Steam so much. But I suspect, yeah, Steam has realized that, particularly because of just shutdowns and such. I don't think I want to do anything with this game. Yep. No. This looks like this is just a mobile game, maybe a gacha game. But yeah, I suspect it is a case that Steam has realized that they just are not going to profit in trying to sell to China, which is the case that every single company that tries to pander to China or break into China and make money eventually realizes is that they've just wasted a ton of money. I honestly don't know why people think it's going to go any different, because it's fairly obvious. Doesn't matter what industry you're in, doesn't matter what secret sauce you think you have, trying to compete in China is way too hard, and it's just not this magical Shangri-La of profitability and success. Maybe at a certain point you do a little bit of business in China, like Lego, just so you can sue copyright people who are stealing your intellectual property. But you never should put more than one small egg in the basket of China, in my opinion. And yeah, I think CEOs should know that. But maybe China is just really good at whining, dining CEOs and convincing them otherwise. The Chinese will basically, and this is a stereotype too, but Chinese companies will basically lie to you and tell you whatever you want to hear. This is interesting. It's the same trailer, but this time they've just put a kind of blurred fog over the cleavage of one character. Is this actually a game I want to play? Probably not, but I'll give it a follow. But yeah, here you see a censored version of the exact same video, which, if anything, that's probably a statement against there actually being censorship that Steam is enforcing, because you wouldn't be able to have the uncensored video. This is a Chinese game, though, so like at a certain level I probably should just take it off the follow list for that reason alone. But it is widescreen, at least, and that's better than potentially what is a mobile game being just not widescreen. But yeah, I guess in general though, it is in stupidity to believe that CEOs and people who run businesses and make business decisions actually know what they're doing. They really don't. And so it's not surprising that they can be lied to and they can be tricked. So we have this game, Ancient Aliens the Game, from a developer called Fifth Column Games and Legacy Games. I don't know if Fifth Column Games is a particularly great title for your development company. In a lot of ways, you kind of know this is a joke game, but the joke here feels like it might not be that bad of an idea. Yeah. My slight concern here is that this might be stolen. Like the likeness of the Ancient Aliens guy might be stolen, and the History Channel logos and stuff might be stolen. And at a certain level, this does kind of feel like this is more of a simulation game or city sim than it is something that would be actually that interesting. And it feels like there might be even microtransactions in it, but doesn't seem like that's the case. Alright, well, I'll give this a follow. It's an interesting idea, at least, if you are going to just make a generic city sim. We have a nonogram game of no real interest, trying to sell itself on single anime girl. Let's see, Fisher's Qualm. Looks like it's a fishing game. I think at a certain level, a top-down pixely fishing game is not the thing I would be looking for. And what's funny is it's tagged as an ASMR-based casual hound fishing game, which I have no idea where the ASMR would make sense. So I'm going to say no to that. Tale of Onogoro, VR puzzle game. Yeah, there might be something here, so I'll give that a follow. This might be another one of these VR games where you have the anime girl assistant just following around you a lot and doing a lot of the activities that you tell her to do, because they can't animate you as a character in VR actually interacting with things. That is definitely a problem. Seems like you have this like gravity gun that can float her around on stones. But yeah, that definitely is a problem in VR, is that a lot of the animation you would be used to doing in a video game, showing a character actually interacting with objects and moving around, does potentially necessitate someone else doing that. This definitely feels like this is potentially even from the same company. Let's see. Yeah, I think it is the same company. Yep, it is the exact same company that made Last Labyrinth in 2019, where you had an anime character. Although they have you in a more extreme situation in Last Labyrinth, where you are strapped to a chair and having to tell the character to do everything, and in that case you can see that this character is doing a lot more of the animations and definitely in risk of dying. I kind of assumed she was a ghost from the beginning, but apparently not. Yep, and this is kind of a great example of a VR only game that probably shouldn't have been VR only, and would have potentially sold better if it hadn't. You can see since November 12th, 2019, while it is 75% positive, it has only 70 user reviews, and that's in part well, actually it's on the follow list because it's a VR game. It's not on the follow list just because it doesn't have enough reviews. Let's see, here we have a game called Never Awake, which looks like it's a side-scrolling shooter and looks decent enough to deserve a follow. The level design selection is weird with a floating character. She's fighting monsters in her dreams. Let's see. King's Castle looks like it's a kind of generic defense game. Nothing really there. They're almost certainly, though, if you are going to have VR games where you have somebody else doing something, needs to be a bit more of a natural experience to it. Just having an anime girl be your assistant doesn't I think, quite do it. I think you need to probably take that thought to the next level and have like a squadron. If you were going to make a Western game where you're like a military squadron and you were the commander giving orders and you were ordering other people, and then there was just a lot of people on your team in general that would take actions without you asking, just to feel like you are actually interacting. A lot of, once you reach a certain point on a track, or once you teleport yourself or walk, however you're actually controlling yourself personally in a game, in a VR game, once you get to a certain point, characters will just start doing things, and it will just be kind of a non-pause cutscene where you can look around and see people doing things. Most of these games I am dismissing without having to really say anything about them, which that's fairly typical. This Isla Sinaloa. In a funny way, this animation looks kind of nice for what looks like a kid's game. I'm not sure I really believe it is a kid's game though. But I guess I'll give it a follow and see. And we're still running into the problems where things are coming out in September, which would be in 2 days. It says coming soon. So more and more, I guess I'm going to have these games just potentially have a YouTube short, and then if they aren't actually out, not bothering to make a YouTube short around them. I'm definitely trying to make a set of rules in my mind that I can remember without having to double check as far as what deserves to be a YouTube short and what doesn't. This Zombie Hunter game has too much visually going on for itself as a top-down twin-stick shooter. There's just like, you can barely even see the screen. Bad design. Let's see, Trespasser looks like it's an asset flip horror game. Yeah, I don't think there's anything there that interests me. Total Factory looks like it's a factory game, which I guess I can give that a follow, but I don't think I want to do YouTube short around it. Nox Timor is probably a meme horror game with some dark screenshot syndrome, so I say no to that. Equilibrium. It's another horror first-person shooter, basically an asset flip game too. Someday I really am gonna have to sit down and think about how much assets, how well do you have to integrate assets that you pre-purchased into a game to be immune from being called an asset flip game. It is 100% by visuals. Like, I have no idea if any of the assets in any game are actually purchased or pre-made. Like, some of them definitely look like they are, but it is a statement on how uniform the content in a game, the visual content in your game is, and how well implemented and used is the visual content. I guess this Super Space Mail is going to be a no. Here we have a prologue to what looks like it would be a adult game. They're calling it an action roguelike shoot 'em up. Definitely feels like a mobile game. And at a certain point, it is just a top-down twin-stick shooter game that I really wouldn't call a shoot 'em up. And again, it is trying to sell itself on beautiful, mystic survivors. Even if this was something that interests me, it's a prologue, so that's going to be a no. Then we have a visual novel, WTC Relentless Protagonists, SXX. don't know what S cross X. I don't know what that would mean. But I can say the visuals here don't look great. They definitely don't look good at all. The narrative seems fairly dark as far as what the story is. But yeah, I don't think I can say yes to this one. Is this anything other than English? Nope. So just a Western visual novel trying to lean on tropes of looking anime while not really being able to animate something that actually does look like anime, and lean on the dark horror tropes of many anime manga visual novels. Here we have an adult game, The True Love Rings, which that's a decent name for an adult game. Although, notably here, not really showing a lot. Like, you have a picture here that is nothing. You have a picture here that's just a girl lying on the table next to food. Picture here that's just nothing. Picture of a ninja girl. Like, maybe these characters lose their clothing in different versions, but there's not even a video to this game. It's potentially a Chinese game, potentially a Japanese game, potentially an English game. As far as adult content, sexual content in general, mature content. But as far as what the actual game is, it says it's a strategy game. That's the only tag here amongst what they've picked. A scene interactive decryption game. Casual and relaxed. Player follows the prompts on the scene to gradually solve the puzzles and help solve problems encountered in life. So you're going to get prompted to click somewhere on the screen. That is definitely not much of a game. Maybe you could take an idea like that and go a lot further, but you obviously aren't going to go very far if you're selling it on sex. I think that game also wasn't actually in the adult section, which the inconsistency around that seems very weird. Panda Roll here doesn't look like anything. We have about 10 more games. The Excavation of Hobbs Barrow. I think I saw somebody talking about this. You can see the reviews, though, don't seem to be great as far as the Steam database. It's an old school point and click adventure game. It looks like an old school point and click adventure game. And since I'm a sucker for point and click adventure games, I will definitely put that on the follow list and do a YouTube short on it. Gyro Gear Tournament Plus. I guess it's a fighting game with spinning tops. So it's kind of like a Beyblade clone with characters on top of it. Okay, that's unique enough that I think that deserves a potential YouTube short and a follow. Atheron Advent 1 is a no. Empty War here has a level of visual polish that's higher than most first-person shooters I see on Steam, so I think that does deserve a follow. Now, we're not really seeing enemies here. He's just kind of shooting at some distant characters that I assume are humanoid enough. It's really not showing you a lot. You're the best warrior in your planet now, race. Now your race wants to conquest everything and you're the only one to stop them. It's not much of a description, but I'll give it a follow. See, this is part of the problem that we're running into, is in general, usually it's horror games that look really good but are very shallow in their concepts. Here we see a first-person shooting game that looks pretty good but is very shallow in its description of actual concepts. And I think we're going to consistently see that increase as a problem, as we just have a lot of games that can look very, very pretty and just aren't really worth playing. And it's not just in the storyline that it might be shallow, it's in the gameplay time that it might be shallow. Even AAA games are sadly very often getting shallower and shallower as far as the story, and sometimes they try to make up with that by having ridiculously long gameplay times, but sometimes they've even given up on that idea. I'll put this foxhole. It's a different type of game, certainly. A military game. And I tend not to want to play realistic military World War II, World War I games, but it is well received. Let's see, destroy a U-boat hunter. This doesn't look terrible either. It's kind of odd to have two military games back to back. I Am Bjorn Escape Room, I think we can say no to. We have 3 more games to look at. Antioch Scarlet Bay looks like it's a visual novel from a cell phone game that's just been converted over. And honestly, I don't know if I would want to try and play a game that just has pure blackness on the sides. But yeah, this one doesn't have a release date or anything, so I'm not going to bother to put it on the fall list. There might be something to it later if they kind of re-release themselves. This is an example of a game that they shouldn't have bothered to put a Steam listing on, because each of these screenshots could be potentially fixed with a patch, as far as not having just pure blackness on the sides. You could have an actual release date, you could have actual pre-orders. There's just nothing you're offering right now that's good, because this is not visually appealing. You don't have any information, you don't have a pre-order option. Alright, and next we have another 3D model adult game that these games love to just straight up in the trailer have like full-on hardcore pornography. This one's called Save the Kingdom, which seems to have a bit more of a fantasy element to it, and I will say it does seem to me like they put more effort in these CG pictures. Seems like in general is just more images and screenshots of sex than you normally would see. That being said, Save the Kingdom very quickly also devolves into a lot of anthropomorphic animals. So you have furry animals potentially having sex with humanoid looking people, so it's straight up bestiality porn at this point, which they tend not to go in that direction, and I would have thought that Steam would have said no to that. But yeah, even if you are switching between the anthropomorphic animals to have scenes between two animals and then scenes between 2 humans, it gets dangerously close to bestiality porn, which furry porn in general is not thought of as bestiality porn, because most furry porns only have furries and never have humans in it. So yeah, this game is labeled coming soon. It's English only, no voice acting. Release date of September 28th. And yeah, no prices or anything. And once again, we've had a couple of days where more of the attempt at anime style has become the norm as far as adult games, and we've had actually very few of the 3D modeled, more realistic Western style games, which that is running my head through a loop. Certainly is. I just don't know what the right average should be. Like, because it does seem to vary just extremely much, and I may very well just have to say, well, there is no consistency at all. Some days you get more Eastern style animation adult games, sometimes you get more Western style animation. They are very different styles visually of games. There seems to be a lot less effort done in the Western style games, which ideally I would like to see Western style games at higher quality and not all of them feel like they are just low effort asset flips. I can't help but assume that some of these games are made very cheaply and then sold on sites like Steam, and then the 3D images are then sold to other porn sites as just static images later on, or they're uploaded to other porn sites as static images. There may be a whole cycle in which things get sold multiple times to make them profitable. And then the last game we have here on Steam is called Looping Bravery, which doesn't look like anything. So that brings us back to the Gematsu articles. Harvestelia details its summer locations, jobs, biomes, renovation, and more, if you want to check that out. We have about 10 more Gematsu articles. The Famitsu issue 1765 review scores available. Here you have another picture of the Splatoon characters. I kind of feel like they made a mistake by not bringing back more of the announcers and characters from Splatoon 2 and Splatoon 1. The game Inscription, 34 out of 40 for the PS5 and PS4 exclusively here. The NBA 2K23 is getting 33 out of 40. And then Splatoon 3 is getting 39 out of 40, so they are very, very happy with Splatoon 3. But they were not willing to give it a perfect score. And there is definitely a level of collusion that happens amongst the 4 reviewers on Famitsu where they are not willing to give perfect 40s to more than a few games. I think over the entire history of Famitsu they've given maybe 5 perfect 40 scores. And generally I think the 5 of people who have gotten perfect 40 scores, a lot of them are like Final Fantasy, very much Japanese RPG type games, not something that would be extremely popular in Japan to the detriment of it being potentially popular anywhere else. We already talked about this. Man of Medan and Little Hope updates now available for the Xbox Series and PS5, so don't need to cover that again. The romance visual novel Witch's Garden is coming to the Switch on December 22nd in Japan. Alright, so I almost want to watch this trailer, but well, you shouldn't bother to. You need to rush. Like, even though I'm not really feeling it, I know I'm actually falling far behind, because there's just a lot of stuff, particularly around playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters, which I'm not doing right now, that I should be doing. Let's see, Magical Drop 6 has been announced for the Switch. This is interesting in that you have like a genie 3-eyed character here with just floating robes. As far as what this game actually is, seems to be just a Puyo Puyo Tetris clone, or Bubble Bobble clone, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't look terrible, and I guess the Magical Drop series has been around for a while. If they're up to 6, it is possible that it's a fairly old game, and it is possible that it plays slightly different. There are surprisingly slightly different variations of what all look like Tetris clones as to how the bricks actually interact. That would justify having different series and not comparing those specific series together. Like Bubble Bobble actually is a bad comparison to this. This is much closer to like a Tetris game in the way it's laid out. A game called Raven Blood has a 17-minute gameplay reveal video. I've not heard of a game called Raven Blood. Can we jump through this trailer? Yeah, it looks like a fantasy game. There is an interesting question in this arises in my mind as far as, is this perhaps the camera angle that you really want nowadays for a Diablo 4 instead of it being a purely top-down image where you can see more enemies? Is it better to have a group of people that you have to spend a couple of minutes fighting and dodging and you have to hit them multiple times to kill them? Or for Diablo, do you still want the top-down, click the left mouse button to do a significant amount of damage to the weaker enemies in one hit? Often one hit killing a lot of the weakest of enemies. I imagine it would be too much of a change if this was what Diablo was. This works good for a different style of game under a different name, but the history and legacy of what Diablo 1 and 2 are forces you to make future Diablo games still kind of be in that genre. Maybe they could have made a spin-off Diablo game, certainly, though. In fact, they almost certainly made a mistake in not making a spin-off Diablo game where you were fighting stronger enemies in smaller groups. And interestingly, this has some kind of card system to it. Yeah, there might be something to this game. Let's see, Death vs. Let It Die Season 1 has been detailed with future seasons and crossplay planned. They are being very ambitious, I think, there to think that they can get enough of a fan base to have a game as a service, which, if one thing did die in the past 2 years, I would hope that it was the concept of games as a service, or the concept in general of keeping players playing a game through a bunch of grindiness just because it increases the odds of a free-to-play player spending money. But I wouldn't be surprised if we still see a lot of that. Wild Hearts launches February 17th for the PS5 and Xbox Series and PC. Debut trailer and screenshots. We've pretty much been all over the place as far as Wild Hearts, so I don't think we need to see that article again. A RPG called Souls of Kronos has been announced for consoles and PC. Interesting. It says console, but not which console. Console version at a later date is all it really says. And then you look at this like thumbnail here, and then you look at what the real game looks like, and there's an odd difference there. Like, yeah, inconsistency as far as the visuals. Not anything that actually looks particularly that interesting. Says it will support English, but right now it's mostly a Chinese game. And you have to just be careful not to get tricked by the trailers or the 2D art. You're going to be looking at this way more than anything else. Smurfs Kart launches November 15th according to Komatsu, which I know there's probably going to be one Mario Kart competitor worth playing on PC, but I'm not sure it's going to be the Smurfs game. But I'm not 100% sure it isn't going to be the Smurfs game either, so I need to keep an eye out for it. And then Shin-Chan, Me and the Professor on Summer Vacation, The Endless 7-Day Journey, PS4 Physical Edition launches January 26th in 2023 in Japan, but likely not coming to the West, as a physical edition at least. And noticeably, since Shin-Chan is pretty popular in Japan and a long-running series, you're getting quite a bit for a limited edition here, just an entire art book and a box to include that. Looks like there might be a sticker pack or a pencil board included also. Not the biggest amount of stuff you could get in a physical edition. I guess they're maybe not calling it a limited edition, because there's almost certainly some other kind of keychains or dolls and other merchandise you could get for Shin-Chan fairly easily and include. And then the PlayStation Plus monthly games lineup for October has been announced: Injustice 2, Super Hot, and Hot Wheels Unleashed. We already talked about that. And then, as far as GameDeveloper.com articles, Take-Two has killed interest in the People Can Fly action title Project Dagger after 2 years. The Outriders developer said Take-Two has moved to terminate its development and publishing agreement, which that's kind of interesting that it's being done so publicly. I guess we may, for the first time, have hit a point where publishers are not willing to let things just flounder and be in development hell. I imagine plenty of publishers have straight up said, we're not giving you any more funding at all, but haven't actively said, well, we're terminating our agreement. But we are starting to see the industry around publishers and developers start to collapse a lot. It is definitely a case where it feels like the truth of the matter is that publishers had a lot of money to throw around before the pandemic, and now they're running out of money, and developers are running out of money in general always. So games are actually getting not finished, and contracts are getting terminated, and lawsuits are almost certainly incoming. But also, I would say, if there was a game called Project Dagger that's been in development for 2 years, I've heard nothing about it, and I don't recognize the screenshot, so I may actually have heard something about it. People Can Fly, as a developer, I don't know if I really trust them to be that good of developers. I mean, they made Bulletstorm, and that's kind of it. And Bulletstorm, while it plays fairly good as a game, is pretty old, and the story around Bulletstorm is pretty unlikable. So, yeah, it does come off as them just not having enough development talent. At least for Take-Two. Maybe we'll find out that People Can Fly gets some other job from like Embracer Group and turns it around. Although I suspect not. I suspect a lot of these development companies aren't particularly staffed with the best of people as far as game programmers, and there are just too many development companies that exist, in particular because one person can't get along with another person, whether it's a development company can't get along with a publisher, or whether it's a producer or director can't get along with another producer and director, and so they just split off to make their own small businesses. Which is an odd argument to say, because in the other industry, if you said, well, let's have everybody be their own boss and own their own gas stations, wouldn't that make more competition and everything better for everybody. Or maybe gas stations is a bad example. If everybody owned their own bread stores and they were baking bread, wouldn't that make everything better? But it's not really true. Competition doesn't work that way. If there were no factories making bread in cities, which that's where most bread comes from, even in grocery stores, is that there's one, maybe two factory that is making the bread and then putting a label on it that is claiming to be a company that's actually making the bread, and then selling that bread to the stores. Very often the bread you're getting from one store is exactly the same as the other. But yeah, particularly in the game industry, I think there's too many developers that are bad and not enough people that are good. And I don't know how you really fix that, because certainly plenty of kids out there would like to grow up and be game developers, but I think they get disenfranchised because of how badly game developers are paid and treated, as far as being overworked, and the good talent leaves to program banking apps and other things that pay better and treat people better. Speaking of treating people better, Ubisoft's boss has suggested that development requires, quote, friction as the publisher deals with a cultural crisis. He made it during an interview on La Presse and has since offered additional context. Let's see what the additional context is. Now, of course, GameDeveloper.com is going to just bring up the problems around Ubisoft and the same story around Ubisoft, which is as far as 2 years ago, they're being basically slander pieces against Ubisoft, but Ubisoft clearly is still suffering from that. Let's see, Gilmo. Really, I want to hear what Gilmo has to say here. Remember, Ubisoft also, in part, was more of that. The parent company of Ubisoft was bought by Tencent. Also, Tencent just laid off a bunch of mainstream video game journalists, which probably was the right move for them, and shut down, moved one of the sites into being a skeleton crew. Anyways, just to try and get some context here, because there's a lot of context around the story, because it keeps growing. He explains that when he spoke of there being tension, he was referring to creative tension that is common and vital to innovative companies like ours. Okay, fine. So take him at his word, because there's no real reason not to take him at his word. And yeah, there probably should be some creative tension, because if everybody's on board of making a Halo clone that's exactly like Halo and steals the entire idea of Halo, then you're not doing something very creative. There should be a general bit of creative tension. Remember, it's important to point out that Guillermo is also speaking in French, so something in French being translated to English is going to come off as a little awkward. But yeah, in the pitch ideas, in that early alpha stage of developing ideas, and in gameplay mechanic ideas, there should be people pitching out different ideas, and there should be potentially some tension as to trying to figure out what would be the best idea, what would fit best for that specific game. If you have a company just full of yes men, where everybody says yes and everybody agrees and everybody gets along, you're going to get a very very generic game, homogenized game at the end of the day. Let's see. Apparently Sean Perrier is the new IGF chair. Here is thoughts on the future of indie games. I guess this is Sean Perrier. I don't think I've ever seen him before. IGF is owned by the same parent company as GameDeveloper.com. That's why they're putting out this article. And honestly, I don't think anything he has to say really matters that much, because I don't think IGF really matters that much. Here's that story I talked about way long time ago. Steam's seasonal sales will include spring instead of a lunar New Year. Beginning in 2023, Steam will add a major spring sale to its seasonal calendar, which means there will be a summer sale, a winter sale, a spring sale, and probably a fall sale. I don't think at that point there's any other seasons you could make up for other kinds of sales. This year's autumn sale runs between November 22nd and 29th, and the winter sale runs between December 22nd and January 5th. And then spring's seasonal sales begin March 16th and end on March 23rd. Yeah. And again, I suspect, if I'm going to speculate, that the Lunar New Year's sales are going away in branding is an admission that they're not really going to succeed trying to pander to the Chinese market, and an admission that the Lunar New Year sales never thematically worked because Asian game developers just would not discount their games that much. Let's see. Apparently PlayStation Plus is another form of lifecycle management, says Shuhei Yoshida. Adding games to the PlayStation Plus helps sustain its life cycle, said the PlayStation's Shuhei Yoshida, and that sustainability can benefit third-party publishers. That's an interesting term, lifestyle management, but life cycle management. I guess it's true. It's probably not something you want to have published to the general people, that they're desperately trying to keep people always playing and logging into the PlayStations instead of getting bored with it and either selling it or putting it in a corner and not playing it. Actually, I imagine they don't particularly care if you bought a PS5 and put it in a corner and never played it. They're afraid of you selling it and lowering their profits on new hardware sales more than anything. Let's see. Blizzard is launching Overwatch 2 with a defense matrix to combat disruptive behavior. The initiative is built around tools, including SMS Protect and a revamped user experience that will keep certain features locked away from new players. So that's their general term for having to play 100 games before you unlock all the original characters and several features. Is this the character Diva grown up, or is this... It looks like it. They may oddly have decided to age up Diva as a character and not aged up any of the other characters. It'll be interesting to see if their attempts actually do something here. It is odd for a free-to-play game, though, to require you to have SMS two-factor authentication, which I imagine is what SMS Protect is. And yeah, I can see a lot of parents letting their kids play Overwatch 2 and then saying, no, you can't play it if it's wanting your phone number. Inevitably, the shame here is that it's unlikely that there will be true honesty as far as how well something like the Defense Matrix initiative will be. They will almost certainly come out and say it was super successful and that all games should do it, or they'll say it wasn't successful enough and they need even more draconian, stronger controls. More likely than anything, they'll just say it wasn't successful enough and that they need more draconian, stronger measures, because that is constantly the narrative that these kinds of games push, to the point where it becomes questionable why they're even bothering to make video games in the first place if they just hate gamers so much. which is often the attitude they seem to be taking. Moving on, our final game developer article says the VR publisher InDreams is permanently increasing the wages to deal with cost of living increases. The company said that all full-time employees will receive £1,000 wage increase, which £1,000 wage increase in the UK, is that annually, weekly, monthly? Is that even really enough? I'd assume that's monthly, so an extra $1,000 in your paycheck monthly is pretty good. It's not amazingly good for high-level, potentially qualified employees, particularly when in the UK in particular things are just going increasingly more expensive. Giving $1,000 now may be just an effort to fight away from having to increase wages later. Interesting. I didn't realize there were two versions around the game of which is a very old game that they just recently figured out how it worked. Let's see, can you play the single player? Third party EULA. You know what, I haven't had to really look at third party EULA as much lately. I feel like Steam maybe has stopped people from being allowed to make third party end user license agreements, or I've just not been paying attention to it. More than likely I've just not been paying attention to it. Well, 89% with 19 user reviews. I think I have to make an executive decision here as we're doing the fall list cleanup, and say yes, this deserves to go on the wish list. If I ever do play or buy one of these games, I will only buy one of them, and very possibly Tabletop Simulator would just simulate this game perfectly fine, and you wouldn't need a custom separate game. At $5.99 to play an old game that you're probably only going to play once, still probably a little expensive. We have a game called Uppers, which is a sexual content beat 'em up game. Really? Does it have sexual content in it? Really? Nudity, sexual content, general mature content. So it's a fighting game. Over to the top brawler puts you in control of numerous fighting games, including the character Daidoji Senpai of Senran Kagura series, which honestly I suspect that the Senran Kagura series may be dead for good. It doesn't really feel like it's pushing the adult content much here, though. And it otherwise follows all the rules, so... This is kind of the example of a game where you would want it to toe the line, or even sometimes cross the line into adult content without being just blatantly nudity all the time if you're going to try and cover it on Steam. And interestingly, this is a beat 'em up game, not a fighting game. Yeah, it looks like maybe it has a element here where you play as guys, and that attracts the girls, and then there's a maybe groping mini game. Kind of have no idea who Daidoji Senpai is. I kind of suspect it might be this character. But otherwise, even though it is adult content, this goes on the wish list. It's rated positively. Of course, yeah. A spin-off of the Senran Kagura game does make an argument that you maybe don't need to play it until you've played the Senran Kagura games. When did this come out? October 2021. 88% positive. Visual novel, Western visual novel horror game. Yeah, I guess I'll put that on the wish list. Just make an exception. I don't know how many visual novels I'm really going to cover, but I would potentially want to find more Western ones that are decent. Again, we're doing U letter games, so I'm working my way towards the end of the list as far as the fall list. And we burnt through the fall list cleanup fairly quickly. Maybe a year and a half it's been that I've started doing the fall list cleanup in the way that I've been doing it, and I'm just really much more progress was made than I thought I would have made, which that's a good thing because that's also allowed me to add a bunch of stuff to the fall list and be more flippant about that. This VR game looks pretty decent, but it's a VR game, so it stays on the fall list. Unto the End is mixed, so we'll take that off. Until the Last Breath is not relevant because it has only 6 reviews, so we'll take that off. Untangled is 90% positive, but it has only 11 reviews. And so I just have to make a decision here. Is this something I'd want to play? English only. First person thriller horror survival experience taking a school. You know what? I'd probably say no to this, but I'm going to give it more time even though it doesn't really deserve it, and just leave it on the fall list and think about it later. Like, I really do have that ability at this point where I can just say no. And as far as making a decision, here we have one that claims to be full English as a visual novel, and if that is the case, then that would be great, not having to read all this dialogue. Otherwise, I will put it on the wish list. There is definitely a danger that the wish list gets flooded with visual novels to the point where I'm accidentally buying visual novels when I'm not planning to. Unstrong Space Calamity can leave. It's not relevant. And then our last fall list cleanup game, Unsold. Let's see. Action RPG game. Looks like a top-down twin-stick shooter. It is rated very positively, but visually it's just not grasping. It's not grabbing my attention. So, yeah. This just kind of came out. Yeah, I'm gonna say no to that. Okay. So let's start a Duel Link Spectate since I have a daily quest around that. I'll scroll down my Twitter feed to see if there's any new news worth talking about, and then I'm gonna take a break and then hopefully come back and play Offspring some more to get the daily quest done. I'm not sure I even mentioned it, but Skull and Bones has been delayed. Has been delayed another 4 months. So yeah, Skull and Bones definitely not looking great as a game, and it wasn't looking great before. They keep delaying it, which I guess at this point an extra delay is not going to dissuade anybody new. So hopefully they just release a game that is actually very polished and good when it does come out. Still scrolling down my Twitter feed and going quiet. Yeah, it's still ridiculous that Atlas is suing the Shin Megami Tensei MMO players who are keeping the private servers, running the private servers. Seems like a really dumb move. Apparently, Cyberpunk 2077 has cleared 20 million sales following its recent resurgence. That is very ridiculous. Apparently a new fan-made age is coming to Myst Online. It's the Chisno Prevniv Library. Is where they're unveiling the age. But yeah, the fandom around Myst Online is still high. Also, the original Myst game is like 29 years old today, so pretty old, which definitely makes anybody who played the original Myst game pretty old too. Let's see, I don't think there's anything else. Apparently Treyarch is continuing to investigate situations as far as black screens of players on Battle.net playing Black Ops Cold War. They put out an update. You need to do a scan and repair apparently. The PUBG creator Brendan Green's next game is a blockchain powered metaverse title, which that does not sound good, but also not super surprising either. I don't think it's video game related, but it seems like YouTube is putting out some new feature around searching health related content on YouTube. Yep. So I don't have a ton of stuff to do. I just need to synchro summon 5 more monsters, play 3 solo matches, and that's it. So that's not asking a ton, but yeah, ideally also you would want to win and continue winning all the way to the top tier. But it would be a lot nicer if there was more rewards for getting to the top tier. Like, you get 2 legacy packs if you get to 2100, you get a title if you get to 2200. I could see myself potentially getting to 2100 and not even bothering to get 2 more victories to get the title, because the title's just not going to really matter. I'm still scrolling down my Twitter feed just to make sure. That weird double Kickstarter between 2 very different games, Wild Arms and Shadow Hearts, has added the Final Fantasy and Scarlet Grace saga composers to the projects, which I suppose that was probably already established and they just hadn't announced it because they're just using it as advertisements. Yep. The Skull and Bones release date now is March 9th, 2023, after the delay. So, yeah. Let's see. Yeah, YouTube's got this new thing. Starting this week, when you search for health topics and questions related to certain conditions, almost certainly that would be monkeypox and COVID. Maybe some more general conditions like cancer, AIDS, things like that. Depression, I could see. You'll see a shelf showing videos of personal stories relevant to the topic, which seems like an odd system in which you're highlighting people talking about their own personal emotional stories or events, but instead of highlighting people who would be actual experts in it as far as being doctors and being able to describe symptoms and what you can expect to go through or what kind of treatments there are. Also, you're not highlighting statisticians or surveyists who would have surveyed hundreds if not thousands of people with that condition and dealt with that and gotten a general idea of what people in general have as an experience. Very anecdotal system, which doesn't make the most sense. So here you have like cancer story and then personal stories as a shelf. I have cancer, which almost certainly like 90% of these will be clickbait things, where it's like, oh yeah, I have a tiny bit of a mole of skin cancer on my pinky that I've already had removed. Is what you'll have as things that an algorithm would pick up. And inherently, topic alone, the problem with this is almost this idea of doing personal curation on YouTube, which is a service and a system that cannot have personal curation. So at some point they're going to say they want an algorithm to determine what gets offered when you search certain medical conditions, and that even if now it is being curated, in the future it won't, and it will turn out to be very useless. I definitely would not suggest anybody turn to YouTube as far as medical information or any factual information at all, and I don't think anybody really is turning to YouTube for that. I'm basically advertising a game that is stolen content at this point, but it's worth pointing out that this game that's been reported still is on Steam. It's like, yeah, it's been since the 16th, basically. So at a certain point here, it will be well over like 30 days, and this game seems to still have been able to sell itself on Steam with stolen art in the game. And I don't have to say allegedly at this point at all. I know for a fact it's stolen art. Well, I'm confident enough that it's stolen art that I'm willing to say it outright as a I'm confident enough to say it without fear of being sued. Alright, well, I have a little bit of stuff to do still on Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Masters, or quite a bit to do, really. And we've been going over 3 hours, so that's going to be it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. If you want a friend to follow me on any social media sites, there's a bunch of links down below. And if you want to support me further, there's a link to Patreon, or you can friend me on Steam and get me a game off my wishlist. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.